My marriage ended at a dinner table, not in a lawyer's office, not in a screaming match at home with the doors locked and the neighbors pretending not to hear. It ended in a restaurant, on our 7th anniversary, under soft lighting, with a bread basket between us and strangers at every table within earshot. She had been building to something all evening. I could feel it. 7 years teaches you a person's weather patterns. The way she held her wine glass without drinking, the way she answered my questions with half sentences, the way she kept looking at me like she was waiting for me to say the wrong thing so she'd have permission to say hers. I didn't give her the wrong thing. I stayed calm. I asked about her week. I ordered the salmon. I made the kind of quiet, steady conversation that used to feel like love and had slowly started to feel like strategy. Then the entrees arrived, and she put her fork down and said it. "I need you to sell the properties. All of them. We consolidate, we move the money into my firm's fund, or I'm done. I mean it this time. I'm leaving." She didn't whisper it. The couple to our left stopped talking. I set down my knife. I looked at her. Not with anger, not with shock. I had heard versions of this sentence before, in different rooms, with different levels of volume. But this one was loud enough to matter. This one had an audience. And I said, "Okay." Just that. One word. She laughed a little, nervous, waiting for the rest of the sentence. There was no rest of the sentence. I picked up my fork and continued eating. And that single moment, that silence after "okay," was the first time in 2 years I watched fear move across my wife's face. Because she had expected a negotiation. She had no idea the negotiation was already over. We met at a work conference 11 years ago. She was presenting. I was in the 3rd row. She was sharp, confident, the kind of person who owned a room without asking for permission. I admired that.
I still do, even now. Admiration doesn't disappear just because trust does. We dated for 2 years before we married. In that time, she was direct about what she wanted. A partner who was stable, someone who wouldn't compete with her professionally but could hold his own financially. I fit that. I owned 2 rental properties by the time I was 31. Small ones, nothing flashy, but they were mine. Debt managed, producing income quietly in the background while I worked my regular job. She liked that about me, in the beginning. What I didn't understand then was the difference between someone admiring your stability and someone wanting to absorb it. The first time she suggested moving my rental income into a joint investment account managed through her firm, we had been married 8 months. I said I'd think about it. She didn't push. She just nodded and moved on. And I remember feeling relieved that it was that easy. It was never that easy. That moment was just the first placement of a piece on a board I didn't know we were playing on. Over the next 2 years, she would return to the subject of my properties 6 more times, each time with a slightly different angle. Practicality, tax efficiency, our future, simplicity. The language changed. The destination never did. I loved her through all of it. That part is important to say out loud. But love and awareness are not the same thing, and I was only running one of them. The first real fracture didn't feel like a fracture. It felt like a bad week. We were 3 years into the marriage. I had acquired a 3rd property, a duplex 2 towns over, modest but solid. She found out through a joint bank statement before I had the chance to tell her myself. I hadn't hidden it. The timing was just off by 2 days. She didn't yell. She got quiet in a way that filled the entire house. She told me that financial decisions that size should be mutual. I agreed with that in principle and apologized for the timing.
What I didn't say was that the account I used was mine alone, opened before we married, and that nothing in our agreement required her signature on it. I didn't say it because I wanted peace more than I wanted to be right. That was my first mistake. Not the property, the silence. Because what I taught her in that moment was that my boundaries had a price, and the price was low. A few cold days, some quiet tension, and I would soften. I would accommodate. I would find a way to make her comfortable at the expense of my own position. She learned that faster than I realized. The incidents that followed weren't dramatic at first. They were small. A comment at a dinner party about how I was sitting on assets instead of growing them. A conversation with her colleague, loud enough for me to hear, about husbands who play it too safe. A suggestion floated casually that I consider signing a property management agreement through her firm, just to streamline things. Each one I let pass. Each one I filed. Not on paper, not yet. Just in the part of my mind that tracks patterns. By year 5, I had started doing something I never told her about. After significant incidents, I would write a brief note to myself. Date, what happened, what was said, how it was framed. Nothing emotional, just facts. A record of the pattern, because some part of me already understood that patterns eventually become evidence. By year 6, I had consulted a divorce attorney. Not to file, just to understand. To know what my position actually looked like from the outside. What was mine, what was joint, what would be contested. She was at a conference that day. I met the attorney during my lunch break and paid in cash. I drove home that evening and made dinner, and we watched television, and she leaned against me on the couch, and I let her, and I felt the full weight of what the marriage had become. Not a partnership, a slow negotiation I had been losing on purpose. That night, I stopped losing on purpose.
I didn't tell her. I didn't change my behavior. I didn't pull back visibly or create distance she could question. I just quietly, methodically started building a door. We left the restaurant without finishing the meal. She had stopped eating after my okay, pushed her plate forward slightly, the way people do when they want to signal something without saying it. I finished my salmon. I drank the last of my water. I settled the bill without rushing. Outside, the air was cold. She walked ahead of me to the car, heels sharp on the pavement. I noticed she wasn't speaking. That was unusual. Normally, after a confrontation, she would fill the silence with justification, next steps, a reframe that made her position sound reasonable. She was good at that. 11 years of watching her present had taught her how to control a narrative in real time. But she had nothing for okay. Okay had no shape she could push against. On the drive home, she tried once. She said, "You're not actually serious." Not a question, a test. I said, "I meant what I said." She turned to look at me. I kept my eyes on the road. "So you're willing to just blow up our marriage over this?" I didn't answer that. Not because I had nothing to say, because what she had just done was reframe the ultimatum she delivered as something I was causing. I had seen that move before. Responding to it directly would open a negotiation. I wasn't negotiating. We got home. She went upstairs. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table and felt something I hadn't expected. Not sadness, not anger. Relief. The kind that lives under years of managed tension. The kind that only surfaces when you finally stop bracing. I sat with it for a while. Then I went upstairs, and she was awake, staring at the ceiling, and neither of us said anything. And that silence was the most honest thing our marriage had produced in months. She was waiting for me to break. To apologize. To say I was being stubborn and that we could talk about it and find a middle ground. I turned off the lamp. I closed my eyes. I had waited 2 years for this night. I could wait until morning. She was already awake when I came downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee, still in last night's clothes. She had been crying, or close to it. Her eyes had that tight, careful look people get when they're trying to hold a specific expression in place. She had clearly been preparing what to say. I let her go first. She told me she loved me, that the dinner had gotten out of hand, that she had been under pressure at work, and the frustration had come out sideways, and she hadn't meant for it to land the way it did. It was a clean speech, measured, the kind you rehearse at 2 a.m. when you realize the other person didn't react the way they were supposed to. I listened to all of it. Then I went to the home office and came back with a folder. I set it on the table between us. She looked at it the way you look at something you already know is going to change things. Inside was a printed summary from my attorney consultation. Not a filing, just a document outlining asset division as it would likely stand. My properties, clearly categorized as premarital assets. The joint accounts, split evenly down the line. A note on the investment account she had been pushing me toward for 3 years, flagged specifically, because my attorney had identified it as a potential commingling risk if I had ever transferred funds into it. I hadn't, not once. She picked up the pages slowly. I watched her read. Next to the folder, I placed my phone, open to my banking app. 3 accounts, all individual, all in my name only. I had quietly separated our shared expenses into a standalone joint account 2 years ago, one we both contributed to for household costs, but nothing else flowed through it. My rental income, my savings, my investment positions, all of it had been quietly restructured over 18 months with the help of a financial advisor she had never met. She set the pages down. "How long have you been planning this?" It wasn't really a question. "Since I realized the marriage was moving in one direction, and you weren't telling me where." She stared at the folder. "You kept all of this from me? You kept your intentions from me for 3 years. I'd kept my preparation from you. I think that's even." That landed hard. I saw it in her jaw. She pushed the folder back toward me slowly, like she was returning something she hadn't meant to pick up. The speech she had prepared for this morning had assumed a specific version of me, the version that apologized, the version that needed the marriage more than he needed his footing. That version had been gone for 2 years. She just hadn't been told. The tears came about 20 minutes later. I had expected them, not because she was manipulative by nature. That framing is too simple and it isn't fair, but because tears had worked before. Early in the marriage, when things got hard, emotion was the language that moved me. She knew that. People learn what opens a door and they return to it. That's not calculation. That's just how long relationships work. She told me she didn't recognize me. I told her I was exactly who I had always been. She said I had become cold, distant, that something had shifted in me and she had felt it for months but hadn't known how to bring it up. I found that interesting. She had not had difficulty bringing things up before. The properties, the accounts, the investment fund she had mentioned 6 times across 5 years. None of those had required her to search for words, but noticing that I was pulling away, that had been hard to raise. I didn't say any of that out loud. There was no point. We were past the stage where the right argument fixes anything. She moved to blame next.
Told me I had never been fully open with her, that my financial independence had always felt like a wall, that she had only pushed toward consolidation because she wanted us to feel like a real unit, and my separateness had made her feel like a guest in her own marriage. I had heard versions of that before too. What she was describing, my boundaries as her wound, was the same reframe she had used at the dinner table the night before. My resistance as the problem, my preparation as the betrayal. I let her finish. Then I said, "I never stopped you from building anything. I only stopped you from dismantling what I built." She went quiet. I think some part of her heard it land, not as an attack, as a fact. She tried one more time, softer now, the blame stripped out of it. She said she wasn't ready for this to be over, that she needed more time, that if we could just go back to a conversation she wanted us to have properly, without ultimatums, without the folder on the table, maybe we could find something worth keeping. And the hardest part, the part I want to be honest about, is that I felt it. Not enough to move, but enough to feel. I had loved this woman for 11 years. That doesn't evaporate because you finally stop letting it be used against you. I told her I would give her a week to decide if she wanted to proceed with separation or pursue counseling with a specific and measurable goal, not open-ended, not indefinite. 1 week. She nodded. I picked up the folder and went back to the office and closed the door quietly behind me. She chose counseling. We went for 6 weeks. The therapist was good, direct, no performance, no false neutrality. In the 3rd session, she told my wife plainly that financial coercion inside a marriage, even when framed as partnership, erodes trust in ways that don't fully repair. My wife didn't like hearing that, but she didn't walk out. I'll give her that. But by week 5, I already knew where I was.
Not because the sessions were useless, because I was sitting in that room watching my wife work very hard to save a version of the marriage that had never actually existed. The version where I eventually came around, where the properties found their way into her firm's fund, where my separateness dissolved into something she could manage. She wasn't trying to save us. She was trying to recover her position. I filed at the end of week 6. Not with anger, not with a speech. I had my attorney send the paperwork on a Tuesday morning, and I told her myself the night before, so she wouldn't be blindsided by a stranger's email. She cried. I stayed until she stopped. Then I left. The divorce was clean, exactly as my attorney had outlined in that folder on the kitchen table. My properties remained mine. The joint account closed and split. No contested assets, because I had never commingled what was mine. 2 years of quiet preparation had produced 40 minutes of uncomplicated legal proceedings. I think about that sometimes. People talk about leaving like it's the hard part, the decision, the conversation, the moment you finally say the thing out loud. But the hardest part had come years earlier. It was the moment I stopped hoping the pattern would fix itself and started building an exit with the same care I had built everything else. Not out of hate, out of clarity. She had handed me an ultimatum at a restaurant table, expecting surrender. What she didn't know was that I had already been standing at the door for 2 years, key in hand, simply waiting for her to tell me to use it. The meal cost $46. The lesson was free.